My name is Chloe, and for most of my life, I believed success would finally make my family love me. I thought if I worked harder, earned more money, became more successful, and carried myself with enough grace, eventually my parents would look at me the same way they looked at my younger sister Sierra. But no matter how much I achieved, I was never enough for them. I was the responsible daughter, the dependable daughter, the daughter who solved problems, paid bills, and cleaned up emotional disasters nobody else wanted to handle. Yet somehow, in my family, reliability was never celebrated. It was simply expected. Growing up in the wealthy suburbs of Atlanta looked glamorous from the outside. Our family lived in a massive white colonial house with tall windows, expensive cars parked in the driveway, and perfectly cut grass that made neighbors stop and stare. To everyone at church and in our community, we looked like the ideal family. My father Derek loved appearances more than honesty, and my mother Brenda treated image like religion. Every family photo had to look perfect. Every dinner had to feel impressive. Every conversation revolved around reputation, status, and how others perceived us. But behind the polished smiles and luxury decorations, our house was painfully cold. Love inside our home always came with conditions. Praise was earned only when it benefited the family image, and affection was distributed unevenly. Sierra received it naturally. I spent my entire childhood chasing it like a starving person searching for scraps. Sierra was beautiful, loud, charming, and effortlessly selfish. She knew exactly how to command attention the moment she entered a room. Even when we were children, my parents treated her like sunlight itself revolved around her existence. If Sierra got a B in school, my mother celebrated her creativity and claimed traditional education was too limiting for her free spirit. But when I brought home straight A's, my father simply nodded and asked why one grade was 96 instead of 100. When Sierra forgot responsibilities, everyone laughed and called her carefree. When I made a single mistake, I was told I embarrassed the family. By the time I turned 16, I understood something heartbreaking. My role in the family was not to be loved. My role was to perform. I was expected to succeed quietly, while Sierra was allowed to shine loudly. I spent years trying to become perfect because I genuinely believed perfection would finally make them proud of me. I studied until midnight every night while Sierra partied with friends. I earned scholarships while my parents paid for Sierra's shopping sprees. I worked internships during summers while Sierra posted beach photos online pretending to live a glamorous influencer lifestyle. Even after I graduated near the top of my class and built a successful career in software development and later public relations consulting, my accomplishments were treated like background noise in my own family. The cruelest part was that I never stopped trying. That was my biggest weakness. Deep inside me still lived a little girl desperate for approval from people who had already decided she would never truly deserve it. By 35, I had built a life most people dreamed about. I owned a beautiful modern home in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. I drove a black Porsche Panamera. My public relations firm managed high-profile corporate clients, political campaigns, and tech launches worth millions of dollars. I employed talented people who respected me, trusted my leadership, and valued my intelligence. Financially, I was more successful than anyone else in my family combined. But whenever I walked into my parents' house, I somehow transformed back into the invisible daughter who could never quite get things right. My mother still criticized my clothes. My father still dismissed my opinions during conversations. And Sierra still found subtle ways to remind me that, despite my success, she believed she had won at life simply because she was married and constantly surrounded by attention. Then came Trey, Sierra's husband, the man who turned our already toxic family dynamic into a complete circus. Trey introduced himself as a crypto investor, startup advisor, and entrepreneur, but most of his life was built on illusion. He loved expensive suits with oversized designer logos, flashy watches bought on credit, and social media posts carefully designed to make strangers believe he was wealthy. My parents worshipped him immediately. In their eyes, Trey represented everything they valued: image, appearance, and the performance of success. They bragged about his business ventures to church friends despite barely understanding what he actually did. Meanwhile, I was quietly funding family emergencies, paying hidden bills, and occasionally helping my parents financially whenever Trey's promises collapsed behind closed doors. Of course, nobody talked about that part publicly. I still remember one particular Christmas dinner that perfectly captured my entire relationship with my family. Sierra and Trey arrived over an hour late wearing matching designer outfits while everyone waited for them to begin dinner. The moment they walked through the door, my mother nearly cried with excitement. She rushed over to hug them while complimenting Sierra's jewelry and Trey's watch. Meanwhile, I had spent the entire afternoon helping cook, decorate, and organize the dinner, but nobody thanked me once. During dessert, my father raised a glass and proudly toasted Trey for building generational wealth. I sat there silently listening while knowing Trey secretly owed thousands in credit card debt and had already borrowed money from three different relatives that year alone. Nobody asked about my company landing a major corporate client the week before. Nobody cared that I had just signed a contract worth more money than Trey had probably ever seen in his bank account. The spotlight never belonged to me. It never had. And still, I kept showing up. I kept buying birthday gifts, attending holidays, sending flowers, and answering late-night phone calls whenever my family needed help. Somewhere deep down, I kept hoping love could eventually be earned through loyalty. I told myself that maybe my parents were simply emotionally distant people. Maybe Sierra would mature one day. Maybe if I stayed patient long enough, things would change. But the truth was much uglier than that. My family benefited from my kindness too much to ever truly appreciate it. They needed me emotionally exhausted because exhausted people are easier to manipulate. They needed me constantly seeking validation because people desperate for love will sacrifice almost anything to receive even a small amount of approval. Looking back now, I realize I spent decades trying to win a competition that was rigged before I was even born. Sierra was the golden child. I was the backup resource. She received unconditional love while I received conditional usefulness. And the tragedy is that I understood this long before I finally accepted it. Every achievement in my life became another desperate attempt to prove I deserved space inside my own family. Every promotion, every business milestone, every expensive gift I bought them carried the same silent question underneath it. Do you love me now? The answer was always no. They only loved what I could provide. And unfortunately for them, they were about to discover what happened when the person funding their fantasy finally stopped trying to earn a seat at the table. Sierra and Trey were the kind of couple people either envied or secretly laughed at behind closed doors. Unfortunately for my parents, they belonged firmly in the first category. The moment Trey entered our family, my mother acted as if a celebrity had personally chosen Sierra to become part of some glamorous empire. Trey carried himself with the loud confidence of a man who desperately wanted everyone to believe he was important. He constantly talked about cryptocurrency markets, blockchain investments, startup funding, and private business deals using complicated buzzwords that sounded impressive to people who did not actually understand finance. My father practically worshipped him. At every family gathering, Derek would proudly repeat Trey's stories to relatives and church members like he was introducing the next billionaire genius to the world. Trey is getting into tech, my father would say with admiration glowing in his eyes. That young man understands money in ways most people never will. Meanwhile, Trey sat there wearing designer loafers and checking the price of Bitcoin every 10 seconds while pretending he was too wealthy to care about ordinary people's financial problems. Sierra loved every second of it. She transformed completely after marrying him. Before Trey, she was simply spoiled and attention-hungry. After Trey, she became obsessed with looking rich online. Her entire existence slowly turned into a carefully staged performance designed for Instagram, TikTok, and anyone gullible enough to believe social media reflected reality. Every restaurant dinner became a photo shoot. Every vacation became a branding opportunity. Every expensive item was strategically displayed like evidence in a courtroom proving she had made it in life. She posted endless selfies holding champagne glasses beside captions about soft life energy and manifesting abundance. She uploaded blurry luxury hotel photos pretending she traveled constantly for business. Meetings while I knew most of those trips were financed by credit card debt and borrowed money. She mastered the art of looking wealthy without actually possessing wealth. And honestly, she was good at it. Thousands of followers admired her lifestyle online. Women flooded her comments asking how she stayed so glamorous. Men complimented her beauty and called Trey lucky. My mother printed screenshots of Sierra's Instagram photos and showed them to church friends like family trophies. Look how successful they are. She would brag proudly while ignoring the fact that Sierra once called crying because her electricity bill was overdue. Trey encouraged all of it because image was the only real currency he possessed. He loved posting videos pretending to take important business calls inside luxury car dealerships even though the cars were not his. He rented high-end vehicles for weekends just to create content online. He bought fake designer luggage to look successful at airports. He once spent nearly 3 hours filming himself walking into a five-star hotel lobby simply to upload a 30-second motivational clip about grinding harder than average people. The comments praised his hustle mentality, while I sat silently watching the performance unravel in real time. The worst part was how easily my parents fell for it. They treated Trey like a financial prophet despite having absolutely no proof of his actual success. If Trey mentioned crypto investments during dinner, my father listened like he was attending a Harvard business lecture. If Sierra posted another fake luxury vacation online, my mother shared the photos proudly with relatives as if she personally raised royalty. Meanwhile, my own success remained strangely invisible. I ran a profitable public relations firm with real clients, real contracts, and verified income. But because I did not constantly advertise my life online, my achievements somehow felt less exciting to them. I remember sitting at my parents' dining table one Sunday afternoon while Trey dramatically explained his newest investment opportunity. He wore a tight designer shirt with the logo displayed as prominently as one possible and casually mentioned moving money through international digital assets. My father nodded so enthusiastically you would have thought Trey personally invented modern banking. Sierra sat beside him smiling proudly while scrolling through comments on one of her latest Instagram posts. Then Trey leaned back in his chair and announced, "Once this next deal closes, we'll probably start looking for property in the Caribbean. Maybe St. Barts or Turks and Caicos. You know, somewhere private for networking with high-level investors." My mother nearly gasped from excitement. "A private villa," she whispered like she was discussing royalty. "Can you imagine?" I stayed quiet, but internally nothing about his story made sense. Real wealthy people rarely spoke the way Trey did. Truly successful people did not need to constantly announce how rich they were. They especially did not spend every dinner conversation desperately trying to impress others. Over the years, I noticed countless inconsistencies in Trey's stories. One month he claimed his investments doubled overnight. The next month he quietly borrowed money from my father. He talked about major business partnerships but could never clearly explain what his company actually produced. Sometimes he bragged about millionaire investors while simultaneously complaining about banks freezing his accounts. None of it added up, but every time I questioned something politely, Sierra immediately accused me of being jealous. "Not everyone wants to live a boring corporate life like you, Chloe," she once snapped during dinner after I asked a simple question about one of Trey's ventures. "Some people actually know how to build wealth creatively." My parents instantly defended her. They always defended her. According to them, Trey represented ambition while I represented negativity. If I noticed obvious lies, I was accused of being bitter. If I pointed out financial risks, I was labeled unsupportive. Eventually, I learned silence was easier than honesty. So I watched quietly while the performance grew bigger every year. I watched Sierra build an online audience obsessed with a fantasy life that barely existed. I watched Trey sink deeper into fake entrepreneurship fueled by ego and borrowed money. Most painfully, I watched my parents treat illusion as more valuable than reality, simply because illusion looked prettier in public. Deep down, I think part of me already knew everything would eventually collapse, lies that large always do. But I never imagined the downfall would begin with a Thanksgiving dinner, a canceled vacation, and an airport full of witnesses. For most of my adult life, I convinced myself that love could be earned through sacrifice. I believed that if I kept showing up for my family no matter how badly they treated me, eventually they would recognize my loyalty and finally love me the way I had always loved them. Looking back now, I realize how tragic that mindset truly was. I was not functioning as a daughter inside that family. I was functioning as an emotional support system with a bank account attached to it. And the saddest part is that I willingly accepted that role for years because I was terrified that if I stopped giving, they would stop pretending to care about me altogether. Every time Sierra and Trey created another financial disaster, somehow I became the person expected to solve it. It started small in the beginning. Sierra would call me crying because her rent payment was late after spending thousands on clothes for social media content. Trey would suddenly need temporary cash flow assistance because one of his crypto investments was supposedly tied up in the market. My mother would call late at night, sounding exhausted and embarrassed, quietly asking if I could help just this once, because the family was under stress. And every single time, I helped them. I wired money. I paid overdue bills. I covered emergency expenses. I even paid off one of Sierra's maxed out credit cards after debt collectors started calling my parents' house. Nobody ever thanked me sincerely. The help was treated like an obligation rather than generosity. The moment I solved one crisis, another one appeared immediately after. It was like pouring water into a bucket with a massive hole at the bottom. I remember one Christmas when Trey claimed he was about to close a huge investment deal but needed short-term liquidity to maintain appearances during negotiations. My mother called me in tears, explaining how stressed Sierra was and how devastated the family would feel if Trey lost this opportunity. "You know how important this is for your sister's future," she said softly over the phone. "You've always been the strong one, Chloe. You're the only person we can rely on." Those words destroyed me every time because deep down, I craved being needed. Being useful was the closest thing to love I ever received from them. So I transferred $15,000 into Trey's account that same night. 2 weeks later, Sierra uploaded photos from a luxury shopping mall holding designer bags while captioning the post, "Blessed beyond measure." Not once did she mention the fact that her blessings were funded by me. That became the pattern of my life. I financed emergencies while they performed wealth online. I cleaned up consequences while they chased attention. Whenever I hesitated or questioned anything, the guilt trips began immediately. My mother was especially skilled at emotional manipulation because she understood exactly which wounds inside me never healed properly. "Family supports family," she would say in that disappointed voice that instantly made me feel selfish. "Money changes people, Chloe. Don't become one of those cold women who forget where they came from." Sometimes she used religion against me. She reminded me that God rewards generosity and punishes bitterness. Other times she compared me to Sierra in subtle, cruel ways. "Your sister has such a soft heart," she would sigh dramatically. She would give her last dollar to somebody she loved. The irony of those statements still makes me laugh now because Sierra would never willingly sacrifice comfort for anyone else. But back then, I absorbed every accusation like poison. I worked harder, gave more, and ignored my own growing resentment because part of me still believed love was hiding somewhere behind all the manipulation. I just needed to earn it fully. Even when I became financially successful, I never truly felt secure emotionally. My accomplishments only increased my usefulness to the family. The more money I made, the more expectations they placed on me. When I bought my first luxury car, my father joked that I could now afford to help the family properly. When I purchased my home, my mother immediately started hinting that I should host expensive holiday gatherings because, you know, your sister and Trey are still building. Everything I achieved somehow became communal property in their eyes. Yet emotionally, I remained completely alone. The painful truth is that my family never celebrated my success unless they could benefit from it directly. When my PR firm landed a major corporate contract, my father barely acknowledged it. But when Sierra gained 10,000 new Instagram followers, my mother threw her a dinner celebration because she was building a brand. I once spent 6 months managing a high-pressure political campaign that nearly destroyed my mental health, and when I finally won an industry award for my work, my parents forgot to attend the ceremony because Trey invited them to a networking dinner at an expensive steakhouse. I sat alone holding my award afterward, pretending it did not hurt while watching Sierra post blurry champagne videos from the restaurant online. Still, despite all of it, I kept trying. I bought thoughtful birthday gifts. I sent flowers to my mother on Mother's Day even when she forgot mine completely. I attended every family gathering even though I always left emotionally drained afterward. Somewhere deep inside me, I still carried the desperate hope that one day my parents would finally look at me with genuine pride instead of conditional appreciation. I wanted to believe there was real love underneath the manipulation. I wanted to believe I mattered beyond my usefulness. The hardest part about growing up emotionally neglected is that you become addicted to tiny moments of validation. One compliment can keep you sacrificing for years. One kind sentence can erase months of mistreatment. My family understood that instinctively. They gave me just enough emotional crumbs to keep me attached. A quick, "we're proud of you," after asking for financial help. A brief hug after I solved another crisis. A temporary moment of inclusion before pushing me aside again. It was emotional conditioning disguised as family loyalty, and I accepted it because I had spent my entire life starving for affection. Looking back now, I realized something heartbreaking. I was not helping my family out of pure generosity anymore. I was paying emotional rent for a place in their lives. Every check I wrote, every sacrifice I made, every humiliation I tolerated, carried the same hidden hope underneath it. Maybe this time they'll finally love me back. But people who only value what you provide never truly see you as a person. They see you as a resource. And unfortunately, I was about to learn that lesson in the most brutal way imaginable. Thanksgiving morning began long before sunrise. I woke up at 5:30 to the soft sound of rain tapping against my bedroom windows and the cold November air creeping through the edges of the house. For a few quiet seconds, I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that this year would somehow feel different. Every holiday with my family carried the same exhausting emotional weight, yet a stubborn part of me still held on to hope like a child refusing to let go of a dying balloon. Maybe this year my mother would smile at me without criticism hidden behind it. Maybe my father would ask about my business because he genuinely cared, instead of using my success as a convenient bragging point to strangers. Maybe Sierra would treat me like a sister instead of competition. Deep down, I already knew better. But hope can survive inside people long after logic disappears. I forced myself out of bed, wrapped a thick, cream-colored cardigan around my shoulders, and walked downstairs into the quiet darkness of my kitchen. The marble countertops were cold beneath my fingertips as I turned on the lights. Outside, Atlanta was still asleep, but inside my kitchen, the annual ritual was about to begin. Every Thanksgiving, my family demanded one thing from me without fail: Big Mama's baked macaroni and cheese. It was my late grandmother's recipe, the only tradition in our family that ever truly felt warm and genuine. My grandmother used to make it every holiday while humming old gospel songs under her breath, filling the house with the smell of butter, cheese, and baked cream. Back then, before appearances and money consumed everything, Thanksgiving actually felt safe. When she died, the recipe somehow became my responsibility. Nobody else was trusted to make it properly. According to my mother, I was the only one patient enough to get it right. The irony of that statement never escaped me. Patience was the role my family assigned me in every area of life. I tied my hair back, turned on soft jazz music in the background, and began cooking. Blocks of sharp cheddar, smoked Gouda, Parmesan, and mozzarella covered the kitchen island while heavy cream simmered slowly on the stove. I grated cheese by hand the way my grandmother taught me because pre-shredded cheese ruined the soul of the dish. Steam fogged the windows while butter melted into thick pasta coated in rich creamy sauce. The smell filled the house almost immediately, warm and comforting enough to make me emotional. Cooking always did that to me. It created the illusion of care even when the people receiving it never truly appreciated the effort behind it. By 8 in the morning, the casserole was finally layered perfectly inside the heavy glass baking dish. The golden cheese topping crackled gently in the oven, while I cleaned the kitchen in silence. I glanced at my phone sitting face down on the counter. No messages from my family. No happy Thanksgiving. No one checking whether I needed help. Somehow that wasn't surprising. My role was never to be cared for. My role was to contribute quietly and arrive smiling. Around 10:30, I finally carried the hot baking dish carefully toward my car. The warmth seeped through the thick towels wrapped around the glass container while cold air bit against my face outside. My black Porsche sat waiting in the driveway beneath gray clouds and damp autumn trees. Most people probably imagined wealthy women like me spent holidays surrounded by glamorous parties and effortless happiness. The reality was far lonelier. Success does not protect you from emotional abandonment. Sometimes it simply gives you a prettier house to feel lonely inside. I placed the macaroni carefully in the passenger seat like something fragile and precious, then climbed behind the wheel. The drive to my parents' house normally took a little over an hour, but Thanksgiving traffic turned Atlanta highways into parking lots. Endless rows of red brake lights stretched ahead of me while radio stations played cheerful holiday songs that only made the silence inside my car feel heavier. Families were traveling everywhere around me. Children laughed in nearby vehicles. Couples carried desserts into gas stations during quick stops. Everywhere I looked, people seemed connected to somebody. Meanwhile, I sat alone in expensive leather seats rehearsing conversations in my head so I could survive another holiday without conflict. I kept reminding myself not to react emotionally if Sierra made passive-aggressive comments, not to let my father's criticism ruin the evening, not to feel hurt if my mother ignored me while praising Trey again. It was exhausting preparing psychologically just to attend dinner with my own family. Halfway through the drive, I stopped at a red light and caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My makeup looked soft and elegant. My dark cashmere sweater fit perfectly. Diamond earrings sparkled subtly beneath loose curls framing my face. I looked successful, polished, composed. Yet underneath all of it, I felt strangely invisible. Sometimes I wondered whether my family would value me more if I were louder, messier, or more selfish like Sierra. Maybe being dependable made me easy to overlook. Maybe people only notice what demands attention aggressively. The thought lingered painfully as traffic crawled forward inch by inch. Around me, Atlanta glowed with holiday warmth. Neighborhoods displayed autumn wreaths and golden lights wrapped around porches. Restaurants overflowed with families gathering together while the smell of roasted turkey drifted through the cold afternoon air whenever I lowered the window slightly. The entire city seemed wrapped in comfort and belonging. But inside my chest sat a quiet ache I could never fully explain. I wanted so badly for this dinner to feel normal. I wanted one peaceful evening where nobody measured my value against Sierra's. One night where I could sit at the table and simply exist without needing to earn my place constantly. By the time I finally turned onto my parents' long suburban street, dusk had already begun settling over the neighborhood. The familiar houses looked warm against the fading sky while soft yellow lights glowed through windows. My stomach tightened automatically the closer I got to the house I grew up in. No matter how successful I became, that driveway still had the power to make me feel like an unwanted child again. I slowed the car carefully and pulled into the circular driveway, expecting to see luxury vehicles lined outside, hear music through the windows, and smell dinner drifting into the cold evening air. Instead, the house sat completely dark. No lights, no cars, no movement. Just silence. For one brief, terrifying moment, I thought something horrible had happened. My heart dropped violently as I grabbed my phone from the center console. Then I saw the unread message sitting quietly in the family group chat. And within seconds, every fragile piece of hope I carried into that driveway shattered completely. The moment I pulled into my parents' driveway, something felt wrong. The house stood completely still beneath the darkening November sky, almost like it had been abandoned hours ago. No warm golden lights glowed through the giant front windows. No music drifted outside. No luxury cars lined the circular driveway the way they normally did during holidays. Even the front porch light was off, leaving the massive white colonial house looking cold and lifeless against the gray evening air. I sat behind the wheel, gripping it tightly while my heartbeat slowed into a strange, heavy rhythm inside my chest. At first, panic hit me immediately. My mind jumped to worst-case scenarios. Maybe someone had gotten hurt. Maybe there was an emergency. Maybe my parents had rushed to the hospital and forgotten to call me during the chaos. I reached quickly for my phone sitting in the cup holder, already preparing to dial my mother's number. That was when I noticed the unread notification sitting quietly inside the family group chat. The message had been sent nearly an hour earlier while I was stuck in traffic driving toward the house. I opened it slowly, and within seconds, every ounce of warmth left my body. "Change of plans," my mother wrote casually, followed by a smiling emoji that somehow made the message feel even crueler. "Trey needed to entertain some VIP investors tonight, so we moved Thanksgiving dinner to La Cienega downtown. It's extremely exclusive and there weren't enough seats available. Just grab something from the fridge at the house if you're hungry. Love you." Attached beneath the message was a photograph. I stared at the image in complete silence while the smell of homemade macaroni and cheese filled the cold interior of my car. There they were. My mother sat beside Sierra, smiling so hard her eyes nearly disappeared. My father held up a champagne glass proudly toward the camera. Trey leaned forward confidently in an expensive navy blazer, laughing beside two older men in tailored suits who were obviously the important investors. Sierra sat in the center wearing a glittering silk dress, while posing like she belonged on the cover of a luxury lifestyle magazine. Crystal chandeliers glowed above the table. Half-finished wine glasses sparkled beside expensive steaks and seafood platters. Everyone looked elegant, relaxed, happy, complete. like a perfect family celebration. A perfect family celebration that somehow did not include me. I kept staring at the picture, trying to process what I was seeing. They knew I was driving 2 hours through holiday traffic. They knew I spent all morning cooking the one dish they specifically requested. They knew I was on my way. And yet they still decided to leave without even calling me personally. Not one phone call. Not one apology. Just a group chat message telling me there was no room. My throat tightened painfully as the reality settled over me piece by piece. This wasn't an accident. They did not forget about me. They actively chose to exclude me. I looked back toward the dark, empty house sitting silently in front of me. Suddenly, it no longer felt like the home I grew up in. It felt like a stage after the actors had already left. Cold, hollow, empty. My chest started aching with a familiar humiliation I had spent my entire life trying to outrun. The worst part was not even the exclusion itself. It was how casual they were about it. The message sounded so effortless, so normal, like abandoning me during a major holiday barely required explanation. Grab something from the fridge. That sentence replayed in my mind over and over until it physically hurt. After spending hours cooking for them, driving across the city, and emotionally preparing myself to survive another exhausting family dinner, my role had been reduced to scavenging leftovers alone in an empty house while they enjoyed champagne downtown pretending to be wealthy elites. I lowered the phone slowly and leaned back against the seat, staring through the windshield while rain tapped softly against the glass. Outside, neighboring houses glowed with warmth and life. Families gathered around dinner tables laughing together while children ran across living rooms carrying desserts and wrapped leftovers. Everywhere around me, people belonged somewhere. But inside that driveway, I had never felt more unwanted in my entire life. For a moment, I genuinely considered turning around and driving home immediately. Part of me wanted to disappear quietly the way I always did whenever my family made it painfully clear I did not matter. But another part of me could not stop staring at that photograph. Something about their expressions bothered me deeply. My mother looked almost triumphant. Sierra's smile carried that familiar smugness she always wore when she believed she had successfully outshined someone. And Trey sat there pretending to be the wealthy mastermind my parents desperately wanted him to become. Suddenly, everything clicked together in my mind. This dinner was not about Thanksgiving at all. It was about appearances. Trey needed to impress investors, and somewhere along the way, my existence became inconvenient to the image they were trying to create. I looked down at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. My makeup still looked perfect. My cashmere sweater was elegant and understated. Diamond earrings glimmered softly beneath my hair. I looked successful, composed, respectable. Yet somehow, in my family's eyes, I was still the embarrassing daughter they hid whenever wealthy people entered the room. The realization hit me harder than I expected. My entire life, I had worked endlessly trying to become someone they could finally be proud of. I built a successful company from nothing. I earned more money than anyone else in the family. I paid bills they could not afford. I solved problems they created. And still, when the opportunity came to sit beside important people, they erased me from the table without hesitation. Because deep down, my family did not value substance. They valued performance. Sierra and Trey looked rich, glamorous, exciting. I looked stable, quiet, and emotionally exhausted from carrying everyone else's burdens for years. One image impressed strangers. The other merely kept the family functioning behind the scenes. Tears burned behind my eyes, but strangely, I did not cry. Instead, a heavy numbness spread slowly through my chest. It felt cold, dangerous even, like something inside me had finally become too tired to hurt anymore. I picked up the glass baking dish from the passenger seat carefully and stared at the golden crust through the towel wrapped around it. Hours of work, hours of hope, hours wasted on people who would never truly appreciate any of it. Then I looked once more at the glowing family photo on my phone. They raised champagne glasses while pretending to be a perfect, successful family. And for the very first time in my life, instead of feeling desperate to join them, I felt something else entirely. I felt invisible, disposable, replaceable, like a servant accidentally standing too close to the VIP section. And that was the exact moment the first crack finally appeared inside me. I do not know what came over me in that moment, but instead of driving away, I put the car back into drive and pulled slowly out of my parents' empty driveway. The rain had stopped completely by then, leaving the Atlanta streets slick and glowing beneath rows of city lights. My hands rested calmly on the steering wheel, but inside me something had shifted. The hurt was still there, sharp and heavy in my chest, but underneath it lived another feeling now. A colder feeling. A quieter one. For years, whenever my family humiliated me, I reacted exactly the same way. I cried privately, blamed myself, and desperately tried harder to earn their affection afterward. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I wanted to see them. I wanted to look directly into the eyes of the people who could abandon me so casually and still expect me to love them afterward. So instead of going home, I drove downtown toward La Cienega, the most exclusive restaurant in Atlanta, the kind of place where reservations were nearly impossible unless you were wealthy, famous, or connected. The restaurant sat in the center of Buckhead, glowing like a palace against the dark evening sky. Luxury cars lined the valet entrance while elegantly dressed couples disappeared through massive glass doors beneath golden chandeliers. I stepped out of my Porsche carrying nothing except my purse and years of swallowed humiliation. My cashmere sweater suddenly felt too simple compared to the designer gowns and tailored tuxedos surrounding me, but I forced myself to walk confidently toward the entrance anyway. The moment I stepped inside, the smell of expensive perfume, truffle butter, and polished wealth hit me immediately. Conversations blended together beneath soft piano music, while crystal glasses clinked against marble tabletops. Everything about the restaurant screamed exclusivity. A tall host in a fitted black suit looked me up and down quickly before offering a professional smile that barely hid his judgment. Before he could ask whether I had a reservation, I spoke first. "My family is seated in the VIP section," I said calmly. "The Derek and Brenda party." The host hesitated briefly before nodding toward the back of the restaurant where velvet ropes separated wealthy guests from everyone else. I thanked him quietly and walked across the dining room slowly, my heels clicking softly against imported marble floors. And then I saw them. My family sat beneath a giant crystal chandelier inside a private leather booth, laughing loudly around a table covered in champagne bottles, seafood towers, and half-finished cocktails. Trey leaned forward dramatically while talking to the investors, using exaggerated hand gestures like he was pitching the next billion-dollar empire. My father looked completely mesmerized by him. My mother laughed at every sentence Trey spoke as if he were the most intelligent man alive. Sierra sat beside him, scrolling through selfies on her phone while adjusting diamond bracelets beneath the soft lighting. Nobody looked stressed. Nobody looked guilty. Nobody looked like they had just abandoned their daughter and sister during Thanksgiving dinner. They looked perfect, and somehow, that hurt even more. I stood there silently for maybe 30 seconds, watching them before Sierra noticed me first. Her eyes lifted casually from her phone toward the mirrored wall behind the booth, and the second she saw my reflection, her entire expression froze. The smile vanished from her face instantly. Panic replaced it so quickly it almost looked painful. She leaned toward Trey, whispering aggressively before standing up so fast her chair nearly scraped across the floor. Then she started walking toward me. Fast. By the time she reached me near the velvet ropes, her fake public smile had completely disappeared. "What are you doing here?" she hissed under her breath while grabbing my arm hard enough to hurt. Without waiting for an answer, she dragged me behind a decorative marble pillar away from the investor's view. Her manicured nails dug into my sweater while her eyes darted around nervously. "Are you insane?" she whispered harshly. "You can't just show up here looking like this." I stared at her in disbelief. "Looking like what?" I asked quietly. Sierra glanced at my outfit with open disgust. "Chloe, please," she snapped. "This isn't one of your boring corporate networking events. Trey is in the middle of securing a major investment tonight. Those men out there are extremely important, and we told them you were overseas working on a charity project." I blinked slowly, trying to process what she had just admitted. "You lied about me?" Sierra rolled her eyes impatiently. "Obviously. We needed them to see a certain image. Trey's trying to present himself as successful, powerful, connected. You showing up dressed like somebody's tired accountant ruins the entire atmosphere." The words hit me harder than I expected. I looked down automatically at my dark cashmere sweater and tailored pants. The outfit alone probably cost more than Sierra's entire appearance tonight, but because it lacked giant designer logos and flashy branding, she considered it embarrassing. "You need to leave," Sierra continued urgently. "Right now. Before you make things awkward." I pulled my arm gently away from her grip. I drove 2 hours for Thanksgiving dinner, I said quietly. Mom told me to bring the macaroni. Sierra crossed her arms immediately, irritation flashing across her face. Oh my God, Chloe, stop acting like such a victim all the time. Plans changed. Adults adapt. Trey is trying to build something important, and honestly, your energy tonight is already making everything uncomfortable. My chest tightened painfully. My energy? I repeated softly. Yes, she snapped. You always walk around acting bitter because your life is sad and lonely. Not everyone wants to spend holidays discussing spreadsheets and business contracts. Some of us actually know how to enjoy life. Before I could answer, heavy footsteps approached from behind the pillar. My parents had noticed Sierra disappear and came looking for her. The moment my mother saw me standing there, her face tightened instantly with frustration instead of surprise. Not concern, not guilt, annoyance. Chloe, she whispered sharply while glancing nervously toward the investors. What are you doing here? I stared at her speechless for a second. You invited me, I said finally. Not anymore, my father muttered impatiently while checking his watch. We explained the situation already. My mother stepped closer, lowering her voice dramatically. Sweetheart, tonight is very important for Sierra and Trey. Those investors are considering a $2 million business partnership. We can't afford distractions right now. Distractions. That was apparently what I had become. A distraction. An inconvenience. Something embarrassing that needed to be hidden before wealthy people noticed it existed. I felt humiliation spreading slowly through my body while the sounds of laughter drifted from the dining room nearby. My own family was celebrating 20 feet away while treating me like an unwanted stranger standing outside a private party. Then my mother did something that finally shattered whatever dignity I still carried into that restaurant. She opened her designer handbag quickly, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and pushed it directly into my hand. Here, she whispered urgently. Go buy yourself dinner somewhere else tonight. Maybe order room service or something. Just please don't make a scene. I stared down at the money resting in my palm while silence filled the hallway around us. $100. After years of loyalty, financial support, emotional sacrifice, and endless attempts to earn their love, this was apparently my value to them. A small cash payment to disappear quietly before important people noticed me existing. My father sighed impatiently beside her. Take the money, Chloe, he muttered. Don't be dramatic about this. Trey's future is on the line tonight. Trey's future. Sierra's image. The investor's comfort. Somehow everyone mattered except me. I slowly looked back up at my mother's face. She genuinely expected me to accept the money, smile politely, and vanish like an obedient employee dismissed after serving dinner. Not one of them apologized. Not one of them asked how I felt. Not one of them cared that they had abandoned me during Thanksgiving after I spent the entire day cooking for them. At that moment, standing behind a marble pillar while my mother bribed me to disappear from a restaurant I was never meant to enter, something inside me finally began dying. And the terrifying part was how calm I suddenly felt. I stood there staring at the crisp $100 bill in my mother's hand, while the sounds of laughter and clinking champagne glasses echoed from the dining room behind us. For a few long seconds, nobody spoke. Sierra crossed her arms impatiently. My father avoided eye contact completely, and my mother kept glancing nervously toward the VIP section, as if she were terrified the investors might notice me standing there. The humiliation should have destroyed me. A younger version of myself probably would have cried right there in the hallway, but instead I felt strangely numb, almost detached. Like my body finally realized it could no longer survive carrying this much emotional disappointment. Slowly, I closed my fingers around the $100 bill and looked directly at my mother. So that's it? I asked quietly. You abandoned me on Thanksgiving, lie about me to strangers, and now you're paying me to disappear? My mother exhaled dramatically like I was the difficult one. Chloe, please stop making this emotional, she whispered sharply. This dinner is about business. Trey is trying to secure a future for this family. I almost laughed at the irony of that sentence. A future for the family. That was always how they justified using me. Every sacrifice demanded from me somehow became for the family. Every time they needed money, emotional labor, or silence, they wrapped it in the language of loyalty and guilt until refusing felt selfish. My father finally stepped forward with irritation written all over his face. You know how important appearances are in high-level business, he muttered. Those investors need to see stability, wealth, and success tonight. Trey is building relationships. Sierra nodded immediately. Exactly. And honestly, Chloe, you showing up unexpectedly after we already explained the seating situation just creates unnecessary tension. I stared at all three of them, trying to understand how human beings could speak with such complete detachment from reality. They truly believed I was the problem standing there. Not the fact that they abandoned me. Not the lies. Not the manipulation. Me. Then my mother said the sentence that changed everything forever. Speaking of appearances, she added carefully while lowering her voice even further. When you get home tonight, I need you to forward me the final confirmation codes for the St. Plance's Barts trip. I frowned slightly. What? My father immediately glanced around to make sure nobody nearby was listening. Keep your voice down, he snapped. Sierra stepped closer impatiently. The investors' wives want the itinerary details tonight, she explained. They're already shopping for resort clothes, and Trey promised we'd all be staying at the family villa in St. Bart's next month while finalizing the investment deal. I blinked slowly, suddenly feeling ice spread through my chest. The family villa? I repeated quietly. Sierra rolled her eyes. Oh my God, Chloe, don't start. But I already understood exactly what was happening. 3 weeks earlier, my mother had shown up unexpectedly at my office crying about how stressed Sierra and Trey were financially. She claimed Trey's business was on the verge of exploding into something huge, but needed one final push to impress wealthy investors from New York. According to her, the investors expected luxury, status, and exclusivity before signing a major $2 million partnership. My mother begged me to help the family one last time. She painted the trip as a healing holiday for everyone after years of stress and hardship. She told me Sierra was emotionally exhausted. She told me Trey was under pressure. She told me the family desperately needed time together somewhere peaceful. And against my better judgment, I said yes. I spent $35,000 of my own money booking the entire luxury vacation package, first-class flights, a private beachfront villa in St. Bart's, a yacht charter, personal chefs, private transportation, every detail carefully arranged under my name and paid directly from my account. At the time, I convinced myself it was worth it because maybe, just maybe, this would finally make my family appreciate me. Maybe generosity would finally buy the love I spent my entire life chasing. But standing there in the restaurant hallway listening to Sierra casually refer to it as the family villa, the horrifying truth finally became impossible to ignore. They never planned to appreciate me. They planned to erase me completely. Trey was using my money to pretend he was already wealthy enough to own Caribbean property. My parents were helping him build the illusion. And Sierra was happily performing the role of rich entrepreneur's wife online, while strangers admired a lifestyle secretly financed by me. None of the investors even knew I existed inside the story. My contribution had been removed entirely. I was not family to them in that moment. I was infrastructure. A silent, invisible funding source behind their fantasy. My mother looked at me expectantly. We'll need the flight confirmations tonight, she repeated. The investors are very impressed by the St. Bart's property, Chloe. Trey told them it's been in the family for years. I actually felt dizzy for a second. He told them he owns the villa? My father immediately became defensive. It's called business strategy, he snapped. People invest in successful people. Nobody wants to hand millions to somebody who looks unstable financially. So you lied, I said softly. Sierra crossed her arms again. Everybody exaggerates in business. God, Chloe, this is why you struggle socially. You take everything so literally. I looked at her face carefully then. Really looked at her. She genuinely felt no shame. None of them did. They were standing in a luxury restaurant eating expensive food while discussing how to use my money to trick investors into believing Trey was already rich. And somehow, they still viewed themselves as victims whenever I questioned anything. The realization changed something fundamental inside me. Up until that exact moment, my pain still came from wanting their love. But suddenly the sadness began disappearing. In its place came clarity. Sharp, cold clarity. These people were not misunderstanding me. They were exploiting me deliberately. Every compliment, every guilt trip, every emotional speech about family loyalty. It had all been manipulation designed to keep me useful and obedient. My mother reached toward me again impatiently. "So you'll send the confirmations tonight?" she asked. "We need everything finalized before morning." I stared at her hand for a long moment. Then I slowly opened my fingers and let the $100 bill fall onto the marble floor between us. The green paper fluttered softly before landing beside her expensive heels. Silence filled the hallway immediately. My mother gasped quietly like I had committed some unforgivable act. "What is wrong with you?" she whispered harshly. I lifted my eyes toward her calmly. For the first time in my entire life, I was no longer looking at my family with desperation or hope. I was looking at them exactly as they truly were. Users. Liars. Parasites dressed in designer clothing pretending to be important while feeding off the daughter they never valued. And strangely enough, the heartbreak was gone now. All that remained was ice. "Enjoy your dinner," I said quietly. Then I turned around and walked away without another word while my family stood frozen behind me, completely unaware that their entire fake empire had already begun collapsing. I walked out of La Cienega expecting to feel devastated, but instead I felt hollow. The cold November air hit my face as the restaurant doors closed behind me, muffling the sound of laughter and expensive dinner conversations inside. The valet hurried toward my Porsche with practiced politeness, but I barely noticed him. My mind kept replaying the same realization over and over again. My family had never truly seen me as a daughter or a sister. I was a financial safety net, a silent sponsor funding a fantasy life they could not afford themselves. And somehow, even after humiliating me on Thanksgiving night, they still fully expected me to continue serving them. That was the part I could not stop thinking about. Not one of them apologized. Not one of them looked ashamed. Instead, they stood in that restaurant hallway demanding booking confirmations for a luxury vacation I paid for, while treating me like an inconvenience standing in the way of their performance. I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door quietly behind me. The warm leather interior smelled faintly of vanilla and rain, but even inside the comfort of my expensive car, I suddenly felt emotionally exhausted beyond words. I stared through the windshield at the glowing restaurant sign, while people in designer clothes walked inside laughing together. Somewhere behind those glass windows, my family was continuing dinner as if nothing had happened. As if they had not just stripped the last pieces of dignity from me 20 feet away beside a marble pillar. My phone buzzed against the center console almost immediately. Sierra. I ignored it. Seconds later, another notification appeared. Then another. Then my mother started calling too. I closed my eyes briefly before finally picking up the phone. "What?" I answered flatly. Sierra did not even pretend to sound kind. "Where are you?" She snapped immediately. "Trey needs the St. Bart's confirmation codes tonight." I almost laughed from disbelief. "Are you serious right now?" "Yes, Chloe, I'm serious," she hissed impatiently. "The investors' wives are already asking questions about the villa and travel schedule. We need the booking details before midnight so Trey can forward everything professionally." Professionally. The irony nearly made me choke. Trey was pretending to own property he had never paid for, using reservations purchased entirely with my money. Yet somehow I was still expected to assist the performance politely. "You embarrassed me tonight," I said quietly. Sierra groaned dramatically. "Oh my God, here we go again. Chloe, not everything is about your feelings." That sentence hit harder than she realized because it perfectly summarized my entire relationship with my family. My feelings only mattered when they were useful to somebody else. Otherwise, they were treated like an inconvenience, slowing down more important people. I gripped the steering wheel tightly. "You told strangers I was overseas because I ruined your image." "Because you do," Sierra snapped back instantly. "You walk around acting miserable all the time. Trey is trying to close a life-changing deal, and you show up looking emotionally unstable at an investor dinner." Emotionally unstable. I sat there in silence, absorbing the cruelty of those words while rainwater slid slowly across the windshield. I had spent years funding emergencies, solving problems, and sacrificing my own peace for this family. Yet somehow, I was still the unstable one, because I wanted basic respect. "Just send the confirmations," Sierra continued coldly. "Stop making this difficult." Then she hung up. No apology, no shame, nothing. I stared down at the dark phone screen, feeling something inside me grow colder by the second. Minutes later, my mother called next. I answered this time mostly out of disbelief. Sweetheart, she said immediately, using the soft, manipulative voice she reserved for moments when she needed something. Please don't ruin tonight with unnecessary drama. I actually smiled bitterly at that. Unnecessary drama. Apparently, abandoning your daughter on Thanksgiving and bribing her to disappear from dinner was not dramatic, but expecting basic decency somehow was. Mom, I said slowly, do you hear yourself? She sighed heavily like I was exhausting her. Chloe, you know how stressful this situation is already. Trey has investors flying in from New York. There are lawyers involved, contracts involved, millions of dollars involved. This is bigger than personal feelings right now. Bigger than personal feelings. Bigger than humiliation. Bigger than family. Everything in my family always became bigger than me eventually. We just need the confirmation numbers, my mother continued. After tonight, we can all sit down and talk properly. That was another lie they loved telling me. Later. We'll talk later. We'll fix it later. We'll appreciate you later. But later never came. The moment they got what they needed, the emotional concern disappeared completely. Do you even understand what you did tonight? I asked quietly. Silence lingered for a second before my mother answered carefully. You're being overly sensitive again. Again. Always again. My pain was never treated like a valid reaction. It was a personality flaw. Something inconvenient everyone else had to tolerate while continuing to use me. Then my father took the phone from her. I could hear movement and restaurant noise in the background before his irritated voice filled my ear. Listen carefully, Chloe, he said firmly. Trey's future depends on this deal. The least you can do is cooperate after everything this family has done for you. I nearly stopped breathing for a moment. Everything this family has done for you. The manipulation was so deeply ingrained in them, they genuinely believed I owed them endless sacrifice simply for being born into the family. I paid for the entire trip, I said quietly. Exactly, my father replied immediately, completely missing the point. Which means it would look extremely suspicious if the paperwork suddenly disappeared. Stop acting emotional and send the confirmations tonight. There it was, the truth hidden underneath everything else. They were not worried about me. They were worried about appearances, about maintaining the illusion long enough to secure money from investors. My role was simple: fund the fantasy quietly and stay invisible afterward. I ended the call without responding. For several long minutes, I sat alone inside the car while my phone continued buzzing endlessly with messages demanding confirmation codes, flight details, and itinerary information. Nobody asked whether I made it home safely. Nobody cared how deeply humiliated I felt. Nobody even acknowledged the cruelty of what they had done. They only cared about protecting the lie. And for the first time in my life, instead of feeling heartbroken, I felt something far more dangerous. I felt detached. The sadness was disappearing now. In its place came clarity so sharp it almost felt peaceful. My family did not love me. They loved access to me. Access to my money, my stability, my reliability, my silence. I was not their daughter anymore. I was their ATM wearing human skin. And sitting there alone in the parking lot while my phone buzzed nonstop with demands from people who had discarded me hours earlier, I finally understood something terrifying. They would never stop taking from me willingly, which meant eventually I would have to become the one who stopped giving. I sat alone inside my Porsche for what felt like hours after the calls finally stopped. The engine was still running softly beneath me, warm air drifting through the vents while rainwater slid across the windshield in slow, uneven lines. Outside, the glowing lights of La Cienega reflected against the wet pavement like pieces of another world entirely. Through the giant glass windows of the restaurant, I could still see silhouettes moving beneath chandeliers, waiters carrying expensive wine bottles, wealthy couples laughing over candlelit tables. Somewhere inside that building, my family was still celebrating, still smiling, still pretending to be successful, important people while I sat alone in a parking lot realizing my entire life had been built around earning love that was never truly available to me in the first place. My hands rested quietly against the steering wheel, but inside my chest something heavy was collapsing piece by piece, not dramatically, not loudly, quietly, like an old building finally giving up after years of invisible damage. For most of my life, every humiliation I experienced inside my family came with the same emotional reaction: pain, desperation, self-blame. I always walked away wondering what I could have done differently to make them treat me better. Maybe I worked too much. Maybe I seemed emotionally distant. Maybe I should have smiled more, helped more, sacrificed more. I spent decades believing the problem somehow lived inside me. But sitting there alone on Thanksgiving night, while my phone buzzed endlessly with demands for confirmation codes and luxury travel details, something terrifying finally became impossible to ignore. Nothing I did would ever be enough because love was never the reward waiting for me at the end of all those sacrifices. I was not a daughter inside that family. I was a resource, a reliable emotional support system with money attached to it. And the cruelest part was that they had stopped hiding it completely. Earlier that evening, my mother handed me $100 and told me to disappear before I embarrassed them in front of wealthy investors. Sierra looked directly at me and admitted they lied about my existence because I did not fit the image they wanted to present publicly. My father defended every insult because protecting Trey's fake millionaire fantasy mattered more than protecting his own daughter's dignity. And somehow, even after humiliating me publicly, they still expected me to continue financing their lies without hesitation. They truly believed I would keep helping them forever no matter how badly they treated me. That realization should have shattered me. Instead, it exhausted me. There is a moment in certain people's lives when emotional pain becomes too repetitive to remain painful. The heartbreak burns itself out completely, leaving behind something colder and far more dangerous than anger. Clarity. That was what I felt now sitting inside that car beneath the dim parking lot lights. Pure clarity. Every memory from my childhood suddenly rearranged itself into a story I could finally understand properly. I remembered being 8 years old, standing in our kitchen holding a perfect report card, while my father barely looked up from the newspaper before criticizing one grade that wasn't high enough. I remembered Sierra forgetting homework repeatedly while my mother laughed and called her creative. I remembered paying for my own college textbooks while Sierra received shopping money for spring break vacations. I remembered every Christmas where I quietly handled responsibilities, while Sierra received praise simply for arriving dramatically late wearing something expensive. The pattern had always existed. I just spent years refusing to accept it fully because accepting it meant admitting something devastating. My family did not love me conditionally. They barely loved me at all. They valued what I provided: stability, reliability, money, emotional labor, silence. I was useful to them, and useful people are often mistaken for loved ones until the moment they stop giving. I leaned my head back slowly against the leather seat and closed my eyes. For years, I believed survival inside my family depended on obedience. I thought if I stayed generous enough, patient enough, forgiving enough, eventually they would choose me too. But the truth was they had already chosen long ago, and it had never been me. Sierra was celebrated for existing. I was tolerated for serving. She received unconditional affection, while I received conditional usefulness. The difference between us was never effort. It was value. And suddenly, realizing that no longer hurt the way it used to, it freed me. Because once you stop begging people to love you, they lose the only weapon they ever had against you. I felt the fear disappear first. Then the guilt. Then the desperate instinct to fix every crisis for people who never protected me in return. One by one, the emotional chains wrapped around my life began snapping quietly inside my chest. I was no longer the lonely little girl sitting at the edge of the dinner table hoping somebody would finally notice how hard she tried. I was no longer the exhausted woman wiring money into family emergencies hoping gratitude would eventually become affection. I was no longer emotionally starving enough to accept humiliation as the price of belonging. Somewhere between the empty driveway, the fake investor dinner, and my mother bribing me to disappear from Thanksgiving altogether, the last fragile piece of hope inside me finally died. And strangely enough, the death of that hope brought peace with it. I opened my eyes slowly and looked toward the restaurant again. My family still had no idea what was happening inside me. They believed this night would end the same way every other cruel night ended. Chloe would cry privately, calm down eventually, and continue helping the family because she always did. They still believed guilt controlled me. They still believed I needed their approval badly enough to tolerate anything. They were wrong. For the first time in my life, I no longer wanted their love because what they offered was not love. Real love does not humiliate you publicly. Real love does not erase your existence to impress strangers. Real love does not hand you money and ask you to disappear during Thanksgiving dinner. What my family offered was control disguised as obligation, and I was finally too exhausted to keep confusing the two. My phone buzzed again beside me. Another message from Sierra. Did you send the St. Bart's confirmations yet? Trey needs them tonight. No apology, no shame, no acknowledgement of the damage they caused. Just another demand, another expectation, another reminder that my feelings meant absolutely nothing compared to maintaining their illusion of wealth. I stared at the message silently for several seconds before placing the phone face down again. Then I looked toward the passenger seat, where the untouched tray of macaroni and cheese still rested beneath thick towels. Hours earlier, I made that dish with love, with hope, with desperate longing for connection. Now it looked pathetic. A perfect symbol of everything I kept giving people who would never truly appreciate the effort behind it. Slowly, I wrapped both hands around the steering wheel and took a long breath. The sadness was gone now, completely gone. In its place lived something colder, sharper, more controlled. And for the first time in my life, I realized something that would soon destroy my family's entire world. People become extremely dangerous the moment they stop needing approval from the ones hurting them. And sitting alone in that parking lot on Thanksgiving night, I finally became dangerous. I pulled out of the restaurant parking lot slowly, the city lights blurring past my windows as Atlanta stretched endlessly beneath the cold November sky. The rain had finally stopped completely, leaving the streets glossy and reflective under rows of glowing traffic lights. For the first time in years, my mind felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful exactly, but empty in a way that almost resembled peace. The desperate need to be understood by my family had finally burned itself out inside me. All that remained now was clarity. And clarity can be extremely dangerous in the hands of someone who has spent years being underestimated. My phone sat face down beside me while notifications continued vibrating across the screen nonstop. Sierra, my mother, my father. Message after message demanding confirmation codes for the St. Bart's trip like nothing else that night mattered. Not the humiliation, not the lies, not the fact that they abandoned me on Thanksgiving. Their only concern was protecting the fantasy long enough to secure money from investors. They genuinely believed I would continue financing their performance after everything that happened. The arrogance of it almost impressed me. I drove in silence for nearly 15 minutes before finally pulling into an empty parking lot overlooking downtown Atlanta. The skyline glittered beautifully in the distance while cold air drifted through the cracks of the car windows. I shifted the Porsche into park and stared out at the city for a long moment. Then I picked up my phone calmly and opened my contacts list. My thumb hovered over one name briefly before pressing call. Vanessa. My executive assistant answered before the second ring even finished. Good evening, Chloe, she said immediately in her calm, professional voice. Happy Thanksgiving. Is everything all right? I leaned back against the leather seat slowly. Happy Thanksgiving, Vanessa, I replied quietly. I need you to do something for me right now. There was a short pause on the line. Vanessa had worked with me long enough to recognize the difference between stress and certainty. Tonight, my voice carried certainty. Of course, she answered carefully. What do you need? I looked out at the glowing skyline one last time before speaking. Open the St. Bart's reservation package under my name. The full family booking. I heard keyboard clicks immediately through the phone. Vanessa worked quickly even late at night. I have it, she said after a few seconds. The villa, first-class flights, yacht charter, chef services, airport transportation, everything. Hearing the list out loud almost made me laugh. $35,000. $35,000 spent trying to buy love from people who only respected appearances. I closed my eyes briefly. Cancel all of it. Silence. Complete silence. Even Vanessa seemed shocked for a second. All of it? She asked carefully. Everything, I repeated calmly. The flights, the villa, the yacht, the chefs. Every reservation connected to that trip. More silence followed while the sound of typing resumed softly in the background. Understood, Vanessa finally said professionally. I'll begin immediately. I sat quietly listening to the distant clicking of keys while cold satisfaction slowly spread through my chest for the first time that night. Not rage. Not revenge exactly. Just balance. My family spent years assuming my generosity had no limits because they mistook patience for weakness. Tonight, they were about to learn the difference. Start with the flights. I instructed calmly. Void every ticket completely. I don't care about cancellation penalties. Done, Vanessa replied after several moments. The first class reservations are officially canceled. The seats will likely be resold by morning. I imagine Sierra arriving at the airport weeks later dressed in designer clothes expecting luxury treatment while her boarding pass suddenly failed to exist. The thought should have made me feel guilty. Instead, I felt lighter. Next, I continued, contact the villa management company directly. More typing. I'm connected to their after-hours representative now, Vanessa said. Would you like the entire property reservation canceled? I stared down at my reflection in the dark windshield. My family spent all evening treating me like an embarrassment while secretly relying on my money to maintain their illusion of wealth. They built their fantasy on top of my loyalty and assumed I would never stop supporting it because I always had before. They were wrong. Cancel the villa, I said quietly. Immediately. Understood. Another pause followed while Vanessa handled the request. Then finally, the beachfront property has been fully released back to the resort. Refund processing has started. A slow breath escaped my chest. Somewhere deep inside me, years of emotional exhaustion were finally beginning to loosen. Now cancel the yacht charter too, I added. And remove the private chef reservations. Vanessa did not question me anymore. She simply worked efficiently through each luxury arrangement one by one, while I sat alone overlooking the city that raised me. The yacht company confirmed cancellation, she said after another few minutes. The chefs have also been removed from the itinerary. Transportation services are canceled as well. Everything. Gone. In less than 10 minutes, the entire fantasy my family planned to use for their performance had disappeared completely. The Caribbean villa, the luxury flights, the champagne sunsets, the investor dinners beside private beaches. All of it erased quietly with a few phone calls because the one person truly funding the illusion had finally decided she was done participating in it. Where would you like the refunds routed? Vanessa asked professionally. I smiled faintly for the first time all night. Back to my account. Done. Silence settled between us again briefly before Vanessa spoke carefully. Chloe, are you okay? I looked out at the Atlanta skyline glowing against the darkness. For years, that question would have broken me emotionally because I spent most of my life pretending I was fine while drowning inside. But tonight, the answer felt strangely simple. I think, I said slowly, I finally am. Vanessa did not respond immediately. Then softly she said, Good. After ending the call, I placed the phone down beside me and stared quietly into the distance. Somewhere downtown, my family was still sitting inside La Cienega drinking expensive wine while dreaming about a luxury vacation that no longer existed. They still believed they controlled the narrative. They still believed I would keep sacrificing myself to protect them from consequences. They had absolutely no idea that the foundation beneath their entire fantasy had already been pulled away. And the most terrifying part? I felt no guilt about it whatsoever. Because for the first time in my life, I was not acting out of anger or emotion. I was simply reclaiming what was mine. The final emotional chain connecting me to my family had snapped completely inside that parking lot. And with one quiet phone call, their entire illusion began collapsing into the ocean. By the time I finally arrived home, it was almost midnight. My neighborhood sat in complete silence beneath the cold November sky, while soft yellow porch lights glowed warmly across empty streets. Normally, after family gatherings, I returned home emotionally exhausted, replaying every awkward conversation and every subtle insult in my head until I could barely sleep. But tonight felt different. Tonight there was no confusion left inside me. No guilt, no self-blame. Just a strange, icy calmness settling deeper into my chest with every passing minute. I carried the untouched tray of macaroni and cheese into my kitchen and placed it silently on the marble counter. Hours earlier, I cooked it with love, hoping Thanksgiving might somehow repair years of emotional distance inside my family. Now the smell of melted cheese and butter only reminded me how foolish I had been. I looked at the dish for several seconds before finally covering it with foil and shoving it into the refrigerator untouched. Then I walked directly into my home office. The room overlooked the Atlanta skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, while soft city lights shimmered against the darkness outside. My framed degrees hung neatly beside awards from corporate campaigns I spent years building with almost no support from the people currently exploiting my success. The irony felt almost poetic now. Everything my family desperately wanted to pretend to be, I had quietly become years ago without needing fake investors or luxury performances to validate it. I sat down slowly at my desk and opened my laptop. Within seconds, new messages from Sierra appeared across my phone screen again. Did you send the confirmations yet? The investors are asking for the villa itinerary. Trey needs the flight codes immediately. No apology. No acknowledgement of the humiliation from earlier. Not even fake politeness anymore. Just demands. Endless demands from people who genuinely believed my role in life was to finance their fantasy quietly while accepting emotional scraps in return. I opened the original St. Bart's travel documents stored in my email. The PDF package looked flawless. Luxury resort branding, first-class Delta itineraries, private transportation details, yacht schedules, oceanfront villa reservations. Every page screamed wealth, status, and exclusivity. Exactly the kind of material Trey needed to convince wealthy investors he already lived inside the world he desperately wanted access to. For a brief moment, I simply stared at the files silently. $35,000. Months ago, I would have considered this trip an act of love. Tonight, I saw it clearly for what it really was. Evidence of how deeply manipulated I had allowed myself to become. Then slowly, something unexpected happened. I smiled. Not emotionally, not bitterly, calmly. Because suddenly, for the first time all night, I understood exactly how this story was going to end. I opened my PDF editing software carefully and began working. My hands remained perfectly steady while the glowing screen reflected across the dark office around me. First, I highlighted the actual airline booking confirmation codes and deleted them completely. Then I replaced them with random combinations of letters and numbers that looked legitimate enough to fool anyone who never bothered verifying them professionally. Next came the digital boarding pass barcodes. I erased every functional code while keeping the elegant Delta first-class layout completely intact. Visually, everything still looked luxurious and expensive. But technically, the documents were now worthless. I moved down to the villa reservation pages next. The glossy resort photos remained untouched because I knew Sierra would immediately post them online. The villa name stayed visible. The beachfront images stayed visible. The total price remained displayed boldly at the bottom of the reservation because I knew seeing $35,000 attached to her lifestyle made Sierra feel important. I left every glamorous detail exactly where it was: infinity pools, ocean views, private chef experiences, yacht excursions. All of it remained perfectly polished on the surface. But beneath the appearance, the foundation no longer existed. The reservation numbers were fake. The property manager contact information was removed. Every usable detail vanished quietly beneath the luxury presentation. It was the perfect metaphor for Sierra and Trey themselves. Beautiful on the outside, empty underneath. The deeper I moved through the documents, the calmer I became. This was no longer emotional revenge. It felt surgical, controlled, precise. My family spent years weaponizing appearances against me, so ironically, appearances would become the exact thing that destroyed them. When I finally finished editing the files, I leaned back slowly in my chair and reviewed everything carefully. To the average person, the package looked flawless. Elegant branding, luxury details, exclusive experiences. Anyone desperate enough to believe the fantasy would accept it immediately without questioning anything deeper. And Sierra was absolutely desperate enough. That was the funniest part about all of this. Sierra never checked facts because facts were irrelevant to her. She cared about aesthetics. If something looked expensive online, she accepted it as truth instantly. She never verified the reality beneath appearances because her entire life depended on avoiding reality whenever possible. I exported the modified files carefully, attached them to a message, and stared at the blinking cursor for a moment before typing calmly, "Here are the updated confirmations. Tell Trey to make sure everyone arrives at the international terminal by 6 in the morning. The flight check-in process is apparently strict." I almost laughed after typing that final sentence. Then I pressed send. The message disappeared instantly into the digital void between us. For several seconds, silence filled the office completely. Then my phone buzzed violently with incoming notifications. Sierra, again. I opened the message slowly. Finally, she wrote immediately. The investors' wives are obsessed with the villa already. Trey says this is going to change everything for us. Us. That word nearly made me laugh out loud. Sierra genuinely believed she was standing at the beginning of some glamorous new life, while sitting directly on top of a bomb she could not even see ticking beneath her. Minutes later, another notification appeared. Instagram Live, Sierra is now broadcasting. I clicked the notification calmly and watched her appear on screen sitting inside Trey's Mercedes with perfect makeup, oversized designer sunglasses, and manic excitement glowing across her face. Good morning, beautiful people. She smiled brightly toward thousands of followers. We've been so busy preparing for St. Barts with our investors, and honestly, life feels unreal right now. Then she held up the exact fake travel documents I had just sent her. She proudly zoomed in on the first-class flights and luxury villa images, while bragging about private island energy and generational wealth. Thousands of followers flooded the comments with admiration. Instantly, Sierra glowed beneath the attention, completely unaware that the paperwork she proudly displayed to the world was nothing more than a beautifully designed countdown toward public humiliation. And sitting alone in my dark office while city lights flickered beyond the windows behind me, I realized something almost terrifying. I was no longer angry watching her lie. I was patient, because the trap was no longer being built. The trap was already closed, and my family had walked into it willingly while smiling for the camera. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight pouring softly through the giant windows of my bedroom. For the first time in years, I did not wake up feeling anxious after a family gathering. Normally, holidays left me emotionally drained for days afterward, replaying conversations and wondering how I could have behaved differently to avoid conflict. But this morning felt strangely light. The emotional weight I carried for most of my life had finally started lifting from my chest. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and immediately saw dozens of notifications flooding the screen. The family group chat was exploding with excitement. Sierra had already posted multiple photos online before 8 in the morning. In one picture, she stood inside a luxury boutique, holding several designer shopping bags, while captioning it, "Preparing for Island Life." In another, Trey posed beside a black Mercedes wearing sunglasses indoors while writing a long paragraph about elevating into a new financial season. My mother responded beneath every post with heart emojis and comments praising them for living the dream. I stared at the screen quietly while sipping coffee in bed. The complete detachment from reality would have shocked me once. Now it simply fascinated me. Less than 12 hours earlier, these same people abandoned me during Thanksgiving dinner and treated me like an embarrassment. Yet somehow this morning they were already back to performing wealth online like nothing happened. And the craziest part? They genuinely believed the fantasy themselves. Another notification appeared suddenly. Sierra started an Instagram live broadcast. I opened it immediately. The screen lit up with Sierra sitting in the passenger seat of Trey's Mercedes while bright morning sunlight reflected perfectly against her makeup. She wore oversized designer sunglasses pushed up into her hair and a tight cream-colored outfit that looked specifically chosen to scream expensive. Trey sat beside her in the driver's seat pretending to check business emails while carefully angling his watch toward the camera every few seconds. The viewer count climbed rapidly. Thousands of people joined within moments. Sierra smiled brightly into the camera with the exact fake sweetness she used whenever she wanted attention online. "Good morning, beautiful people," she said dramatically. "I hope everyone had an amazing Thanksgiving because we are officially entering our luxury holiday era." Comments flooded the screen, instantly praising her appearance, her relationship, her lifestyle. Sierra absorbed every compliment like oxygen. "Honestly," she continued while adjusting her hair slowly, "life has been so crazy lately. Trey's business has been growing nonstop, and now we're preparing for our St. Miles Bart's trip with investors next month." My coffee paused halfway to my lips. There it was. The performance had officially begun. Sierra reached beside her dramatically and held up the exact fake travel documents I sent the night before. The first-class flight confirmations glowed clearly on camera beside glossy photos of the beachfront villa. "You guys are not ready for this property," she laughed excitedly. "Private chefs, oceanfront views, yacht parties, we're basically doing a complete island takeover." The comments exploded with jealousy immediately. Women begged her for travel details. Men praised Trey for making it out the mud. My mother even joined the live stream comments calling Sierra our beautiful, successful girl. I watched everything silently while cold amusement spread slowly through my chest. Sierra zoomed directly into the villa images while bragging about how exhausting wealth management supposedly was. Honestly, the investor wives are already stressing me out, she joked dramatically. They keep asking about resort dress codes and yacht schedules. Yacht schedules. I nearly laughed out loud. That yacht reservation no longer existed. None of it existed anymore. But Sierra kept talking confidently because confidence had always mattered more to her than truth. This is what happens when you support a visionary man, she continued while smiling proudly toward Trey. Everybody laughed when Trey started building his empire, but now look at us. Trey finally leaned toward the camera, pretending humility. We're just blessed, he said smoothly. When you stay focused and disciplined, opportunities naturally come your way. The irony was almost unbearable. The man talking about discipline could not even afford the vacation he was bragging about publicly. Every luxury detail sitting inside those fake documents was paid entirely by the sister they treated like garbage less than one day earlier. Yet neither of them felt even slightly embarrassed lying to thousands of people online because appearances were the only thing either of them truly valued. Sierra then made the mistake that changed everything permanently. Her smile sharpened slightly while reading comments from followers. You know, she said casually, there will always be bitter people who hate seeing others succeed, even inside families. My eyes narrowed slowly. Here we go. Sierra sighed dramatically into the camera. Some people just can't stand watching happy marriages and successful black men thrive. But honestly, we pray for those people and keep moving forward. The comments immediately filled with support and outrage. Followers started attacking the imaginary jealous enemies Sierra hinted about, and I knew exactly who she wanted them thinking about. Me. Sierra never mentioned my name directly, but she did not need to. She was already shaping the narrative carefully before the disaster even happened. In her version of reality, she and Trey were self-made successful victims surrounded by jealous energy. Meanwhile, I was simply the bitter older sister unable to handle their success. Watching her manipulate thousands of strangers so effortlessly should have made me angry. Instead, I felt fascinated by how deeply she believed her own lies. Sierra genuinely thought she was winning. That was what made everything so satisfying. She had absolutely no idea she was live streaming from inside a burning building while complimenting the decorations. The fake PDF remained visible in her manicured hands while she proudly explained every luxurious detail to followers desperate to believe in glamorous lifestyles online. She zoomed in on the first-class flights. She highlighted the villa photos. She even bragged about private chefs preparing custom Caribbean menus for the investors. Every single sentence pushed the lie further into public view. And the more public the lie became, the more devastating the collapse would eventually feel. That was the beautiful part. I did not need to expose them anymore. They were exposing themselves voluntarily. Sierra ended the live stream nearly 20 minutes later after thanking followers for supporting their journey. The moment the broadcast ended, my phone buzzed again with another direct message from her. The investors are obsessed, she wrote excitedly. Trey says this trip is going to change our lives forever. I stared at the message silently for several seconds before locking my phone screen completely. Change your lives forever. For once, Sierra was finally telling the truth. Because 3 weeks from now, at an airport crowded with strangers and wealthy investors, their entire fantasy was going to explode publicly in ways none of them could even imagine yet. And sitting quietly inside my beautiful, peaceful home while morning sunlight filled the room around me, I realized something important. I was no longer waiting for revenge. Revenge was already happening. All I had done was stop protecting people from the consequences of their own lies. 3 weeks passed quietly after Thanksgiving. On the surface, everything looked normal. Sierra continued flooding social media with luxury content while Trey kept pretending to be a rising millionaire entrepreneur preparing for a massive investment breakthrough. My parents remained completely obsessed with the fantasy, proudly bragging to relatives and church friends about the upcoming St. Mand. Barts trip like they personally owned half the Caribbean. Meanwhile, I said almost nothing. That silence confused them more than anger ever could. Normally after conflict, I always tried repairing relationships quickly. I apologized even when I was hurt. I checked on everyone emotionally. I made myself available. But this time, I disappeared completely. No emotional phone calls, no arguments, no attempts to defend myself. I simply stopped participating. And because my family spent years mistaking silence for weakness, none of them recognized the danger growing underneath it. The only thing they cared about was the trip. Every few days, Sierra sent new messages asking small questions about the itinerary without realizing the reservations no longer existed. Can you resend the yacht arrival time? Do the chefs accommodate gluten-free diets? Which terminal Joe private transfers meet us at? I answered carefully every time. Calmly. Politely. Always giving just enough information to keep the illusion alive. Sometimes I almost felt guilty watching how confidently they walked toward disaster. Almost. Then I remembered the empty driveway on Thanksgiving. My mother handing me money to disappear. Sierra calling me embarrassing. My father defending lies instead of his daughter. And the guilt vanished immediately. 1 week before the trip, I made another decision that shocked even me. I booked a completely separate vacation for myself. Maldives. Private overwater villa. 10 days. No family. No drama. No emotional manipulation. Just silence and ocean air thousands of miles away from Atlanta. When Vanessa finalized the reservation details, she hesitated briefly on the phone. "You've never taken a vacation alone before," she said carefully. I stared out the office windows at the Atlanta skyline glowing beneath late afternoon sunlight. "I know," I answered softly. "That's probably why I need it." The truth was, I barely recognized myself anymore. For years, every major decision in my life somehow revolved around my family emotionally. Even my success carried traces of desperation for approval hidden underneath it. But now, for the first time, I was beginning to understand what freedom actually felt like. Real freedom is not money. It is not status. It is not luxury. Real freedom is waking up one day and realizing you no longer need validation from the people who hurt you. That realization changes everything. 2 days before the saint, Bart's departure, my mother called unexpectedly. I almost ignored it but answered anyway. "Sweetheart," she said immediately in an unusually cheerful voice, "we're all getting so excited for the trip." I leaned back slowly in my chair. "I'm sure you are." She laughed softly, completely missing the meaning behind my tone. "Sierra says the investors are already planning future partnerships with Trey after this vacation. Honestly, this could change the family forever." There was that word again. Family. My mother only used it warmly when money was involved somehow. "I'm glad everything is working out," I replied calmly. "Are you still upset about Thanksgiving?" she asked suddenly. The question almost amused me because of how casually she said it. Like humiliating me publicly was a small misunderstanding instead of the emotional death of our relationship. "No," I answered honestly. "I'm not upset anymore." And for the first time in my life, that statement was completely true. I was not angry anymore because anger still requires emotional attachment. What I felt now was distance. Cold, peaceful distance. My mother sighed with relief immediately. "Good. I told your father you'd come around eventually. You've always been the mature one." Mature. That word had followed me my entire life. Mature meant absorb pain quietly. Mature meant tolerate disrespect gracefully. Mature meant sacrifice yourself without complaint so everyone else could remain comfortable. But not anymore. "Actually," I said calmly, "I won't be joining you all for the trip." Silence. "What?" my mother asked. "I booked something separate for myself," I explained. "I need time away." Her disappointment appeared instantly. Not emotional disappointment. Practical disappointment. "But who's going to help coordinate things when you get there?" she asked immediately. I almost smiled. Even now, her first instinct was logistics. Service. Utility. Never concern for me personally. "I'm sure Sierra and Trey can handle it," I replied softly. My mother hesitated. "Well, all right then. You deserve rest too, I suppose." Then after a brief pause, she added carefully, "Just make sure you keep your phone nearby during the trip in case we need anything." There it was. Even oceans away, I was still expected to remain available. I ended the conversation politely and sat quietly afterwards staring at my reflection in the dark computer screen. Something about that final sentence affected me deeply. "In case we need anything." My family genuinely could not imagine a version of reality where I no longer existed to rescue them from consequences. They still believed access to me was permanent, but they were about to discover something terrifying. The moment a person stops accepting emotional chains, those chains become useless forever. The morning before their departure, I packed lightly for the Maldives. White linen clothes, sunglasses, books I never had time to read. Simple things. Peaceful things. As I zipped the suitcase closed inside my bedroom, my phone buzzed repeatedly with new family group chat notifications. Sierra uploaded another photo beside expensive luggage while captioning it, "Next stop, Paradise." Trey posted a motivational video talking about building wealth through vision. My father commented proudly beneath every post. My mother reposted everything to Facebook like her family had become royalty overnight. I watched all of it silently while standing inside my beautiful, quiet home. Then I turned my phone off completely. No explanations, no emotional speeches, no warnings, just silence. The same silence they once mistook for weakness. Hours later, while my family prepared for the most humiliating day of their lives, completely unaware of what was waiting for them at the airport, I boarded my own flight peacefully. As the plane lifted into the clouds above Atlanta, I looked down at the shrinking city beneath me and realized something extraordinary. For the first time in my entire life, I felt free. Not because I escaped my family physically, but because emotionally, I finally stopped needing them to love me. And somewhere far below those clouds, the people who spent years using my kindness were still walking confidently toward a disaster they built entirely with their own greed. The morning of the flight felt less like a family vacation and more like the beginning of a celebrity documentary. Before sunrise even touched the Atlanta skyline, Sierra was already posting Instagram stories from inside her luxury bathroom while soft jazz music played in the background. "Big day," she whispered dramatically into the camera while applying makeup beneath glowing vanity lights. "Private investors. Private island. Private life." Thousands of followers watched in real time as she transformed the airport departure into another episode of the fantasy lifestyle she spent years building online. Downstairs, Trey walked through the house wearing a camel-colored designer overcoat despite the relatively warm Georgia weather. He checked his reflection constantly in every mirrored surface, while practicing fake business conversations through his Bluetooth headset. Every movement looked calculated. Every sentence sounded rehearsed. He wanted to look like a man carrying millions of dollars on his shoulders, instead of a man surviving entirely on illusion. My parents, meanwhile, treated the morning like their family had finally entered high society permanently. My mother wore an expensive cream-colored travel set she normally saved for church galas while carrying a Louis Vuitton bag large enough to announce wealth from across the terminal. My father looked almost emotional with pride as he loaded designer luggage into the black SUV waiting outside. He kept repeating the same sentence over and over again. "This is the beginning of something huge for our family." Not once did anyone mention me. Not once did anyone acknowledge the person who actually financed the lifestyle they were performing publicly. By 5:30 in the morning, two luxury SUVs pulled away from the house toward Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, while Sierra live-streamed the entire ride downtown. The comments flooded nonstop with admiration. Goals, power couple energy, manifesting this lifestyle. Sierra smiled proudly at every message while Trey sat beside her pretending to answer investor emails from his phone. Occasionally, he would glance toward the camera and say things like, "When you operate at this level, there's no off switch." The investors and their wives met them directly at the international terminal entrance shortly after sunrise. The contrast between appearances and reality was almost painful to watch. The investors arrived genuinely wealthy, quiet confidence, tailored clothing without oversized logos, understated watches worth more than most people's cars. Real money rarely announces itself loudly. Trey, however, walked toward them performing confidence aggressively like an actor terrified of forgetting his lines. Still, the investors smiled politely because, at least on the surface, the illusion looked convincing. Sierra immediately hugged the investor wives dramatically, while talking about yacht dinners and beachfront massages waiting for them in St. Barts. My mother proudly described the villa as our family property, while my father laughed about future expansion opportunities with Trey's so-called business empire. Around them, the airport buzzed with early morning energy. Rolling suitcases clicked across polished floors. Flight announcements echoed overhead. Business travelers hurried through security lines carrying coffee and briefcases, while my family floated through the terminal like celebrities arriving for an international luxury summit. Sierra made sure cameras captured everything. She posed beside the first-class check-in sign. She filmed Trey shaking hands with the investors. She zoomed dramatically onto their designer luggage, while soft motivational music played over her stories. To everyone watching online, they looked untouchable, successful, powerful, destined for a glamorous future. And standing right in the center of that beautiful performance was a disaster quietly waiting to explode. The deeper my family moved into the airport terminal, the louder the performance became. Trey walked slightly ahead of everyone else like a man leading a corporate empire instead of a collapsing illusion. He shook hands with the investors confidently while discussing fake expansion plans in Miami, Dubai, and Singapore as though international business deals were part of his normal routine. Every sentence out of his mouth sounded polished enough to impress strangers who did not know him well. "The Caribbean market is just the beginning," he said smoothly while adjusting the sleeve of his designer coat. "Once this partnership closes, we'll probably diversify into luxury hospitality investments next quarter." One of the investors nodded politely, though his wife seemed more interested in the vacation details than Trey's fake business language. Sierra immediately jumped into the conversation with perfect influencer energy. "Oh my God, wait until you see the villa," she laughed dramatically. "The infinity pool literally overlooks the ocean. I already told Trey we're never coming back to regular vacations after this." The women laughed together while walking toward the first-class check-in area carrying expensive handbags and rolling designer luggage. Across the polished airport floors, my mother stayed close beside them, smiling proudly like she had personally raised a royal family. Every few minutes she pulled out her phone to take more photos. "Stand together near the Delta sign," she said excitedly. "This lighting is beautiful." Sierra posed instantly beside Trey while the investors stood nearby smiling politely. My father watched everything with visible satisfaction glowing across his face. He loved appearances more than truth, and in that moment, his family looked exactly the way he always dreamed they would. Wealthy, important, admired. Around them, ordinary travelers glanced over curiously at the loud, glamorous group occupying half the terminal entrance. Sierra loved the attention. She filmed another Instagram story while walking toward the first-class counter, slowly panning the camera across champagne-colored luggage, luxury coats, and smiling faces. "Airport energy," she whispered dramatically to followers. "Next stop, St. Barts." Thousands of people watching online envied them, completely unaware that every beautif, the first small crack appeared quietly, almost invisibly. Trey approached the first-class Delta counter with the relaxed confidence of someone who believed the world would always move out of his way. He slid 6 passports across the marble counter smoothly, alongside the printed reservation documents I had sent weeks earlier. The airline employee, a woman probably in her early 30s with perfect professional posture, smiled politely while typing the confirmation numbers into her system. At first, nobody noticed anything unusual. Sierra remained busy filming content while one of the investor wives discussed spa reservations excitedly with my mother. Trey stood casually with one hand inside his coat pocket, projecting calm billionaire energy for anyone watching nearby. Then the airline employee paused. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, but even 3 seconds can feel dangerous when someone's entire identity depends on appearances. Her fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. The polite smile on her face tightened almost invisibly before she typed the confirmation code again. Trey noticed immediately. "Everything all right?" he asked casually, though the confidence in his voice sounded slightly thinner now. The employee looked back at the screen carefully. "One moment, sir." More typing. More silence. Behind Trey, Sierra slowly lowered her phone. My father adjusted his stance impatiently while the investors exchanged small, confused glances. Finally, the employee looked up again. "I'm sorry, sir," she said carefully. "I'm not finding this reservation in our system." Trey laughed softly at first, like the problem was obviously temporary. "Try again," he replied smoothly. "It's an international first-class booking under Trey Whitmore." The employee nodded politely and entered the confirmation number a third time. This time, the silence lasted longer. Much longer. Sierra's smile started fading visibly. "That's strange," she muttered nervously while stepping closer to the counter. The employee frowned slightly at the monitor. "Sir, this confirmation code does not appear to exist." The atmosphere around the group changed instantly. One of the investor wives stopped speaking mid-sentence. My mother's face tightened with confusion while my father leaned toward the counter looking irritated already. Trey's confident posture stiffened slightly beneath his expensive coat. "That's impossible," he said quickly. "Those reservations were confirmed weeks ago. Do you have another confirmation number?" the employee asked professionally. Trey grabbed the printed documents from the counter and stared at them harder now. For the first time all morning, uncertainty flickered visibly across his face. Sierra stepped beside him, whispering aggressively under her breath. "What's happening?" Trey ignored her and forced another smile toward the employee. "There must be a system issue," he said louder this time, mostly for the investors standing behind him listening carefully now. "These are luxury partner bookings." The employee typed again patiently before shaking her head. "Sir, I'm very sorry, but these flight reservations are not active in our system." Silence spread slowly through the group. Real silence this time. The dangerous kind. Sierra looked around quickly, noticing nearby travelers beginning to glance toward the counter. Her influencer smile disappeared completely. My father's expression darkened instantly, while my mother clutched her handbag tighter against her chest. Behind them, the investors were no longer smiling at all. And standing in the center of that growing tension, Trey finally began realizing something catastrophic. The fantasy was starting to crack in public. For the next several minutes, Trey fought desperately to keep the illusion alive before it completely collapsed in front of everyone. At first, he still believed confidence alone could save him. Men like Trey survive by overpowering reality with performance for as long as possible. He straightened his expensive coat, forced another polished smile onto his face, and leaned casually against the first-class counter. Like this entire disaster was nothing more than a temporary inconvenience wealthy people dealt with every day. "There's clearly some issue with your system," he said smoothly toward the Delta employee while adjusting the cuff of his watch for the investors to notice. These reservations were booked privately through a luxury concierge service. The airline employee remained professional despite the growing tension. "I understand, sir," she replied carefully while typing again. "But these confirmation codes are not active in our database." Sierra's smile started twitching visibly. "That's impossible." She laughed nervously while glancing back at the investors standing several feet away. "We literally confirmed everything weeks ago." Behind her, one of the investor wives slowly lowered her sunglasses while exchanging a small, uneasy glance with her husband. The energy around the group had changed completely now. Just 15 minutes earlier, they looked like celebrities preparing for an elite Caribbean retreat. Now they looked confused, unstable, nervous. But Trey refused to lose control publicly. "Not yet." "No problem," he announced loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Just rebook everything first class for this morning. We'll sort the original reservations out later with corporate." He said it confidently because wealthy people solve problems with money. That was the image he needed the investors to believe. The airline employee nodded politely and began typing the new booking information into the system. Sierra visibly relaxed beside him while my parents pretended everything was still normal. My mother even laughed awkwardly toward the investors and said, "Travel days are always chaotic, right?" Nobody laughed back. Several long moments passed while the employee worked silently behind the counter. Then finally she looked up again. "The total for 6 first-class international tickets this morning will be $32,480. Trey barely hesitated before sliding a black metal credit card across the counter dramatically. "Run it." The employee inserted the card. Everyone waited. Then came the sound that destroyed everything. Beep. Declined. The silence afterward felt immediate and heavy. Trey blinked once quickly before forcing another laugh. "That card sometimes flags international purchases," he said casually, though his voice sounded thinner now. "Use the other one." He handed over another card quickly. Beep. Declined. Sierra's face changed instantly. Real panic finally appeared beneath the influencer mask she wore so naturally online. "Trey," she whispered sharply beneath her breath. He ignored her and grabbed another card from his wallet. Then another. Then another. Platinum cards. Business cards. Luxury cards designed to look impressive in public. One after another, the machine rejected every single one. Beep. Declined. Beep. Declined. Beep. Declined. The sounds echoed through the terminal like tiny gunshots. Nearby, travelers openly stared now. The glamorous social media family from earlier had suddenly transformed into a public scene unfolding in real time beside the first-class counter. My father's face turned deep red while my mother clutched her designer handbag so tightly, her knuckles lost color completely. Sierra looked seconds away from collapsing. "Maybe call the bank," she whispered aggressively. "I am calling the bank," Trey snapped back under his breath while sweat formed visibly near his hairline. But the confidence was gone now. Completely gone. One of the investors stepped closer slowly, studying Trey carefully for the first time, not with admiration, but suspicion. "Is there some issue we should know about?" he asked calmly. Trey immediately straightened his posture again. "Absolutely not," he answered too quickly. "This is just a banking delay." But nobody believed him anymore. The illusion was cracking too visibly now. And then everything became worse. Much worse. One of the investor wives quietly stepped aside and called the St. Barts resort herself. At first, nobody noticed because Trey was too busy arguing with the airline employee while my father loudly blamed the airport system for embarrassing the family. But after several tense minutes, the woman slowly lowered the phone away from her ear with a look of complete disbelief frozen across her face. "The villa reservation was cancelled," she said quietly. Every single person froze. Trey stopped talking immediately. Sierra turned toward her slowly. My mother's mouth literally fell open. "What?" the investor asked sharply. His wife swallowed hard. "The resort says there's no active reservation under Trey's name. No villa, no yacht bookings, no chef services, nothing exists." Silence crashed over the group like a wave. Not awkward silence. Dead silence. The kind that arrives when reality finally destroys a lie too large to survive. Trey immediately started speaking again, faster now, desperate and disorganized. "That's impossible. There must be some mistake." "Stop talking," the investor snapped sharply. His voice cut through the terminal hard enough to make several nearby travelers turn around instantly. Sierra's breathing became uneven while my father looked completely stunned. "You told us this property belonged to your family," the investor continued coldly. "You invited us on an international business retreat that doesn't even exist?" Trey kept trying to recover. "I can explain this." "Explain what?" the investor's wife interrupted angrily. "That you fabricated luxury reservations to impress us?" Sierra suddenly burst into tears right there beside the counter. Loud, messy tears that instantly destroyed the glamorous image she spent years building online. "This isn't happening," she kept whispering while grabbing Trey's arm desperately. "This cannot be happening." But it was happening. Publicly. Completely. And there was no way to stop it anymore. The next few minutes felt like watching a luxury skyscraper collapse in slow motion, while everyone inside realized too late that the foundation was fake. Trey kept trying desperately to regain control, but every sentence coming out of his mouth only made him sound guiltier. "Listen," he said quickly while forcing another nervous smile toward the investors. "There's obviously some miscommunication between the travel agency and the resort." "Stop lying," the investor snapped again, much louder this time. Nearby travelers openly stared now. Phones slowly appeared in strangers' hands as people realized they were witnessing something dramatic unfolding in the middle of the first-class terminal. Sierra grabbed Trey's arm harder, whispering through clenched teeth, "Fix this." But there was nothing left to fix. The illusion had already died publicly. The investor's wife stepped forward, holding her phone tightly. "The resort manager confirmed the reservation was canceled almost 3 weeks ago," she said coldly. "Not yesterday. Not this morning. Weeks ago." My mother physically staggered backward slightly after hearing that. "3 weeks?" she repeated weakly. Then suddenly everyone turned toward Trey at the exact same moment. Because 3 weeks ago was Thanksgiving. 3 weeks ago was when the luxury trip still existed. 3 weeks ago was also the last time anyone saw me before the disaster began. I can only imagine the panic exploding inside Trey's head in that moment as the timeline finally connected itself together. Sierra looked at him with growing horror. "Did you know about this?" she whispered. "Of course I didn't know," Trey snapped back too quickly. "Then how did everything disappear?" she demanded louder now. One of the investors stepped even closer, his entire expression transformed from polite professionalism into open disgust. "You brought us here under false pretenses," he said slowly. "You spent weeks presenting yourself as a wealthy investor with private international properties." Trey immediately tried defending himself again. "I am an investor." "No," the man interrupted sharply. You're a fraud wearing expensive clothing. The sentence landed like a slap across the terminal. Nearby travelers openly pretended not to watch while very obviously watching everything. Airport staff shifted uncomfortably behind the counters, while Sierra completely lost emotional control beside them. This can't be happening, she cried again, mascara beginning to smear beneath her eyes. We already posted everything online. That sentence said everything. Even now, standing in the middle of total public humiliation, Sierra's first concern was social media, her image, her followers. The investors' wives looked genuinely embarrassed for themselves now, realizing they had been manipulated publicly by people pretending to belong to a level of wealth they clearly could not maintain. My father finally exploded completely. This is ridiculous, he shouted toward the airline employees even though none of it was their fault. There has to be some mistake in your system. The Delta employee remained calm despite the chaos unfolding around her. Sir, the reservations were canceled directly through the original booking account weeks ago. Silence. Dead silence. My mother's eyes widened slowly as the meaning behind that sentence settled into the group. Original booking account. Suddenly, for the very first time, they were all forced to confront the reality they spent years ignoring. None of this luxury belonged to Trey. None of it belonged to Sierra. The flights, the villa, the yacht, the chefs. Every glamorous detail came from me. And the person they humiliated on Thanksgiving was also the only person holding the entire fantasy together financially. Sierra looked physically sick now. Call Chloe, she whispered desperately toward my mother. Call her right now. My mother grabbed her phone immediately with shaking hands while Trey continued trying to argue with the investors. This doesn't change the actual business opportunity, he insisted desperately. The partnership still makes sense financially. One of the investors actually laughed. Not kindly, coldly. You lied about your lifestyle, your assets, your travel arrangements, and your financial status, he said. Why would we trust anything connected to you now? Trey opened his mouth again, but no words came out this time. Because deep down, even he knew the performance was over. Completely over. My mother finally reached my voicemail. Her voice broke immediately. Chloe, sweetheart, please answer the phone, she begged desperately. There's been some misunderstanding at the airport. A misunderstanding. Even now, she could not fully say the truth out loud. Because admitting the truth meant admitting they destroyed the one person actually supporting them emotionally and financially for years. Sierra suddenly grabbed the phone from my mother and started screaming into it. Chloe, this isn't funny anymore. People turned openly toward her now. Call US back right now. Airport security finally started approaching after Trey slammed his hand violently against the counter while yelling about corporate incompetence. The entire glamorous performance from earlier that morning had transformed into complete public chaos. The same travelers who admired them entering the airport now watched them unravel in real time like reality television. And then came the final humiliation. One of Sierra's followers recognized her from Instagram. A young woman standing nearby slowly looked between Sierra's tear-streaked face and the luxury travel posts still visible online from earlier that morning. Wait, she said quietly to her friend while staring at Sierra. Isn't that the influencer girl who posted about the private island trip? Within minutes, phones started recording openly. Sierra noticed immediately, and panic exploded across her face. Oh my God, she whispered. People are filming. The investors looked disgusted now. Completely disgusted. We're done here, one of them said coldly before turning away. And if I hear my company's name connected to this embarrassment publicly, my attorneys will get involved. That sentence finally broke my father completely. Please, he said desperately while following after them. This is just a misunderstanding. But the investors kept walking. Because wealthy people understand one thing better than anyone else. Real money avoids desperation instantly. And desperation was pouring off my family now like sweat. Sierra collapsed into a chair crying uncontrollably, while Trey stood frozen beside the counter looking like a man watching his entire fake identity die in public. My mother kept calling me repeatedly while my father argued with airport security trying to prevent them from escalating the scene further. Everything they spent years building, the image, the performance, the illusion of wealth and success, collapsed completely in less than 1 hour. And thousands of miles away, I sat peacefully beside the Indian Ocean while warm sunlight stretched across endless blue water outside my private villa in the Maldives. My phone buzzed nonstop beside me with missed calls, crying voicemails, desperate texts, and furious accusations. But for the first time in my life, their chaos no longer controlled me emotionally. I simply stared out toward the ocean while soft wind moved through white curtains behind me. No anxiety, no guilt, no desperate instinct to fix everything for everyone again. Just peace, real peace. The kind that only arrives when you finally stop sacrificing yourself for people who never truly valued you in the first place. Because the truth was simple. I did not destroy my family that morning. Their greed destroyed them. Their lies destroyed them. Their obsession with appearances destroyed them. All I did was stop protecting them from the consequences. And once my loyalty disappeared, the entire fantasy collapsed exactly the way fake things always eventually do. And somewhere in the middle of screaming voices, flashing phone cameras, and the complete destruction of their fake luxury empire, my family finally came face to face with something they had spent years avoiding at all costs. The family group chat exploded before their plane was even supposed to board, and for the first time in my life, I stared at the chaos without feeling any urge to save them from it. For the next 48 hours after the airport disaster, my phone never stopped ringing. At first, the messages came nonstop every few minutes, almost like my family still believed they could force reality back under control if they contacted me quickly enough. My mother left crying voicemails begging me to answer. My father alternated between anger and desperation depending on the message. Sierra shifted wildly between blaming me, insulting me, and begging for help. Trey never apologized once. Instead, he sent long aggressive texts demanding explanations like he still somehow considered himself the victim in all of this. Meanwhile, I sat peacefully on a white lounge chair beside the Indian Ocean while warm sunlight reflected across endless blue water. The contrast between our worlds felt almost unreal. Somewhere in Atlanta, my family's fake empire was burning publicly. And thousands of miles away, for the first time in my life, I finally felt emotionally free. The first voicemail I listened to came from my mother late that night. Her voice sounded shaky and exhausted. "Chloe, sweetheart, please call us back," she whispered through tears. "Everything has become such a mess. The investors pulled out of the deal completely. Trey says they're threatening legal action now. We need to talk as a family." As a family, the phrase almost made me laugh. My family only remembered I belonged to them when they needed rescuing. I deleted the voicemail without responding. The second message came from Sierra. Her tone was completely different. Furious, hysterical. "I cannot believe you did this to us," she screamed. "Do you realize what people are saying online right now?" I opened Instagram out of curiosity and immediately understood her panic. Clips from the airport had already started spreading across social media. Travelers recorded Trey arguing with airline employees. One video showed Sierra crying near the first-class terminal while airport security stood nearby. Another clip captured one of the investors shouting loudly enough for surrounding travelers to hear words like fraud and fake reservations. The comments underneath were brutal. Fake rich people exposed. Instagram luxury strikes again. This is why social media isn't real. Sierra's carefully built online image was collapsing in real time. Followers started digging through old posts, questioning everything. People noticed the same designer bags appearing repeatedly in photos months apart. Others pointed out Trey constantly bragged about wealth but never showed evidence of actual businesses. Within one day, the internet turned on them completely. And somehow, even after humiliating me for years, Sierra still expected me to save her from consequences. I locked my phone again and stared toward the ocean while waves rolled peacefully against the shore. The sound felt calming in a way I had never fully experienced before. No chaos, no manipulation, no guilt, just silence. Then another message arrived, this time from my father. "You've embarrassed this entire family," he wrote angrily. "Those investors think we're liars because of you." I actually laughed out loud reading that one. Even now, after every lie finally exploded publicly, my father still blamed me instead of confronting the truth. That was the problem with people obsessed with appearances. They never learn. They only search for someone else to blame when reality exposes them. 3 days after the airport disaster, my mother called again. This time, I answered. Not because I missed them, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I realized something important. For the first time in my life, I was no longer afraid of the conversation. "Chloe, My mother breathed immediately with visible relief. Thank God. We've been so worried about you. The manipulation almost impressed me. They humiliated me publicly, erased me from Thanksgiving dinner, used my money to fund lies, and somehow she still positioned herself as the worried parent. No, I said calmly while staring out at the ocean. You've been worried about yourselves. Silence. Then my father's voice suddenly appeared in the background. You had no right to sabotage that trip, he snapped immediately. Do you understand how much money Trey lost because of this? There it was. Not concern. Not remorse. Money. Always money. Actually, I replied quietly, I canceled a vacation I personally paid for after being publicly humiliated by the people using me. My father scoffed angrily. Family helps family. I closed my eyes briefly after hearing that sentence because I finally understood something clearly. My family genuinely believed love meant unlimited sacrifice flowing only one direction. Toward them, never toward me. No, I answered softly. Family doesn't abandon someone on Thanksgiving and then ask them to fund luxury vacations afterward. Silence again. Heavy silence this time. Then Sierra suddenly grabbed the phone. Fine, she snapped bitterly. You made your point. Can you at least help us fix this now? I almost smiled hearing that. Even after everything collapsed, she still believed access to me remained permanent. Fix what exactly? I asked calmly. Our lives, she shouted. The investors are gone. Trey's reputation is ruined. My followers are attacking me online. Mom's crying every day. Dad can barely show his face at church. Every sentence confirmed the same thing. They were not sorry for hurting me. They were sorry consequences finally arrived. That distinction changed everything. That sounds difficult, I replied quietly. Sierra actually gasped. That's all you have to say? Yes. My voice stayed calm, steady, detached. And I think that frightened them more than anger ever could. Because for the first time, they realized guilt no longer controlled me. My mother started crying softly in the background. We're still your family, she whispered desperately. I stared at the horizon for several seconds before answering. No, I said finally. You were people I kept trying to earn love from. Then I ended the call. Afterward, I blocked every single number. My mother, my father, Sierra, Trey. One by one, I removed them from my phone permanently. No dramatic speech. No final argument. Just silence. The same silence they once mistook for weakness. Except now it belonged to me. A week later, Vanessa informed me that Trey was apparently facing multiple legal and financial investigations connected to fake investment claims. Sierra disappeared from social media almost entirely after losing thousands of followers. My parents stopped attending church temporarily because too many people were talking about the airport incident publicly. Their entire world collapsed because it was never built on truth to begin with. And sitting alone beside the ocean during my final night in the Maldives, I realized something extraordinary. I did not miss them. Not even a little. For most of my life, I thought losing my family would destroy me emotionally. But the truth was much simpler than that. You cannot lose people who only loved your usefulness. You can only stop exhausting yourself trying to earn what they were never willing to give freely in the first place. The warm night air moved gently through my hair while moonlight reflected across the ocean like silver glass. Somewhere far away, my family was still drowning inside the consequences of their own greed and lies. But for the first time in my life, their chaos no longer belonged to me, and that freedom felt worth more than every luxury vacation, designer bag, fake investor dinner, or public performance they destroyed themselves trying to maintain.